Under the pall of Mordax Prime's perpetual night, the hive spire loomed like a mountain of corroded bone. Inquisitor Avalus Cadus stood at a vaulting window in his strategium, his breath fogging the leaded glass as he watched the roiling heavens. Sensors buried deep within his armored robes whispered to him of gravitational anomalies and empathic static. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. The sky split open without warning, a seam of shimmering emerald and obsidian that tore across the toxic clouds. It was not a bolt of warp lightning or a meteorological flare. The rift peeled back the fabric of reality itself with clinical precision. A pulse of nauseating power rippled through the hive, forcing mortals to their knees. Avalus braced against the shock, feeling his reinforced bones protest, but his mind focused on the wound. Within the tear, shapes moved, impossible vistas, fractal architectures, and then a solitary figure descending like a shard of night. Cloaked in flowing robes of darkest crimson that seemed to absorb the light around them, the being drifted through the gash, trailing streamers of unnatural energy. No simple demon could mimic such composed descent. Avalus's auspex overlaid the scene with numbers that made no sense, mass readings climbing and falling, psychic output that evaded classification. The figure landed in an outer habitation tier with the grace of a predatory bird. Around the tear, the raw edges of reality knit closed, leaving nothing but an echo of cold on the wind. Under his breath, the words came steady and low. Faith in the Emperor carried Avalus through countless incursions, yet this arrival stirred something deeper, an instinct honed by centuries of facing Xenos and heretics. He keyed his vox without turning away from the scene, ordering Arbite's patrols to cordon the impact site. Around him, the sacred machine spirits hummed, the faint glow of litanies etched into his armor, casting ghostly patterns on the stone. The spire continued to shake from the shockwave, dust falling like grey snow. Far below, in the smog-choked depths, sirens wailed. Avalus sensed the usual escalation, panic, riots, cultist agitation, but his mind was fixed on the descending figure. Within the Inquisition there were legends of beings who crossed realities, who devoured worlds or elevated them. The thought sent a chill along his spine. As the tear closed fully and the toxic clouds resumed their sluggish churn, Avalus closed his fist around his rosarius, feeling its reassuring weight. He had witnessed the birth of calamity. The Emperor demanded vigilance, and though uncertainty gnawed at him, he would not falter. With calm certainty, he stepped back from the window, ready to descend into the abyss and confront whatever had entered his world. The sense of dread settled deep, a soft handoff to resolve as he stalked toward the strategium's exit. Descending through the spire, Avalus traversed echoing corridors lined with gilded skulls and servo-cherubim. His retinue followed at a respectful distance, a robed interrogator with data slates clutched tight, a tech priest whose mechadendrites clicked anxious rhythms, and a pair of silent crusaders whose storm shields bore the scars of 100 engagements. The elevator cage shuddered as it plunged through strata of steel and stone, lights flickering with each change in atmospheric pressure. Auspex feeds flooded his implant displays, vox chatter, biometric readouts, bursts of binary, reports of rioting in the lower manufactorum, of astropathic visions of missing workers. The tear had agitated more than warp-sensitive souls. Avalus sifted through the noise, isolating the transmission from the Arbite's precinct nearest the impact. A young arbitrator's voice crackled with static and fear. Unauthorized entity in Sector 17, humanoid, unclassified armor, he managed, before the line dissolved into screams and gunfire. Avalus's jaw tightened. Images downloaded directly to his mind showed security feeds of the stranger striding through a hab plaza. He moved with an unsettling deliberation. Civilians scattered before him like dust before a void ship's wake. His face was hidden by a smooth mask, his eyes twin pits of yellow, and his gait was unhurried. Around him the air seemed to warp slightly, as if reality bent in deference. Avalus recognized neither imperial design nor Xenos form, yet the sigils woven into the robes, elegant, archaic runes, stirred buried memories from forbidden tomes. The figure's presence exuded command akin to a primarch. The elevator grated to a halt at the precinct gate. Massive adamantium doors opened into the choking heat of the hive's mid-levels. The stench of promethium and blood hit him. Avalus wrapped his cloak tighter as he advanced with his retinue. Servitors and arbites gave way, bowing instinctively. He passed murals depicting the Emperor's victory over Horus and the burning of worlds, images that usually stilled his heart. Today they seemed like hollow promises. His mind kept returning to the unknown sigil, to the way the figure had turned as if sensing the omnidirectional cameras, locking eyes with the machine spirits themselves. With calm certainty he recited litany after litany, shielding his thoughts. They echoed in his skull. Suspicion breeds salvation, ignorance is heresy. He would not rush to judgment, but he could not ignore the old myths of galaxy-spanning tyrants from before the age of Imperium. Whatever had come might have been a god in another universe. Around him the hive's hum thickened, a constant metallic ocean. Somewhere deeper, a factory line detonated as agitators seized their chance. For now, his path lay toward Sector 17. He needed to see this entity with his own eyes to measure the threat. The elevator platform ground forward once more, the cage groaning as it bore them toward the unknown. He inhaled, tasting ash and anticipation as the next chamber opened before them, handing off his unease to cold resolve. The corridors leading to Sector 17 were choked with fleeing workers, their gaunt faces smeared with oil and terror. Avalus's crusaders formed a human wedge, shields raised, shepherding civilians aside. Somewhere ahead, the arbites attempted to hold a line. Bolt fire thundered in muffled bursts, punctuated by the scream of las bolts and the guttural chanting of cultists. Avalus's auspex painted flickering silhouettes of hostiles, clusters of heat signatures moving with unnatural coordination. Behind these, a lone figure pulsed with power that defied sensor logic. The Inquisitor's boots splashed through spilled coolant and blood. A manufactorum servitor lurched past, servo arm twitching erratically as if its programming had been infected by the very presence of the newcomer. Avalus spared it no more than a glance, his focus on the voices that brushed his mind. At first they were faint, like static, but as he drew closer to the epicenter, the whispers took form. Layered voices whispering in a language not low Gothic, yet understood at a primal level. They spoke of hunger, of eternity, of empires without number. He recognized the cadence of psychers in distress, of minds colliding with something greater than themselves. He steeled his mental defenses, picturing the Aquila at the core of his being. The corridor opened onto a wide plaza that once served as a gathering space for shift changes. Now it was a war zone. Auspex grids showed the arbites forming a semicircle around the plaza's center, pouring disciplined fire into a milling mass of cultists. The cultists wore the tattered robes of workers, but their faces were painted in dried blood, their eyes wide with fanatical devotion. They wielded makeshift blades and auto tools, but their movement was oddly synchronized. With a hand signal, Avalus halted his group in the shadows of a collapsed archway. He observed through magnoculars while raising psychic wards. In the plaza's center stood the stranger. Closer now, Avalus saw the details of his attire, layered robes edged with gold, armor plates that seemed grown from his flesh. A belt hung with artifacts of strange origin. His hands were clasped behind his back, as if this slaughter barely merited his attention. When a wave of cultists charged, He lifted one hand casually. An invisible force gripped the foremost heretics, lifting them into the air. Their limbs twisted at unnatural angles, bones snapping audibly. Without so much as a gesture, he flung them backward, their bodies smashing into their comrades with enough force to break bones. He did not take cover. Bolter rounds fired by the Arbites at cultists that went astray simply disintegrated before touching him. Their kinetic energy dissipated into harmless sparks. Avalis frowned. This was not the warp. There was no scent of sulfur, no flickering of reality's veil, none of the telltale signs of witchcraft. It was something else, a manipulation of the physical world using will alone. A memory stirred of tech priests whispering of an ancient power known as the Force, a myth from lost data caches. With calm certainty, Avilus watched as the stranger stepped forward. He extended his other hand toward the cultists, and arcs of violet energy leapt from his fingertips, coursing through their ranks. Men and women convulsed, smoke rising from their burning eyes as the energy devoured their life force. It took seconds. When the last cultist fell twitching, the stranger lowered his hands, his expression unreadable behind his mask. He turned slowly, his yellow gaze passing over the Arbites and finally settling on Avilus. For a heartbeat, those eyes pierced layers of secrecy and faith. Then he turned away as if dismissing the Inquisitor's presence and began walking toward a breach leading deeper into the hive. The assault had ended before Avilus could raise his bolt pistol. Shock vied with analytical curiosity. He motioned his crusaders to follow at a discreet distance. Whatever this power was, he needed to understand it before the hive burned. He stepped from the shadows into the blood-slick plaza, transferring his apprehension into measured pursuit. Navigating the labyrinthine lower hive, Avilus felt the weight of centuries pressing in. Each corridor was a canyon of corroded steel, lit by flickering lumen strips that did little to dispel the gloom. Graffiti daubed on the walls in dried ichor depicted symbols that made his stomach lurch. 8 pointed stars interwoven with unknown sigils. His retinue moved silently, boots making little noise on the grit-covered floors. Servitors rolled past, their cogitator songs corrupted into static-laden moans. Somewhere above them the battle between cultists and Arbites still raged, but down here there was an eerie calm. The stranger had not hurried. He walked as if the hive were his own domain, each step placed with preternatural confidence. Avilus kept him in view, staying far enough back that the entity's perception would not notice the pursuit, yet close enough to intervene. Thoughts tumbled through the Inquisitor's mind with each step. Could this be a demon of a form previously unrecorded, a psyker from beyond the Astronomican's light, or a lost son of mankind twisted by ancient science? The whispers in his thoughts shifted, now a chorus of voices that were both alien and familiar. He felt pressure against his wards, a probing presence that tested his mental defenses. He flinched as memories not his own flashed across his inner eye, twin suns setting over a black ocean, a temple city of stone lit by lightning storms, a throne room where a man in crimson armor sat amidst the corpses of his council. These images were not random. They were being shown with intention. Avilus's breath came shallow as he realized the stranger was offering glimpses of his origin. With calm certainty, he pushed back, refusing to be pulled further. He needed his wits. They passed through a marketplace-turned-charnel house. Stalls were overturned, goods trampled underfoot. Bodies lay in contorted heaps, some victims of the riot, others drained of all moisture. Tiny spectral motes drifted above a few corpses, lost souls unable to find passage to the Emperor without proper rites. Avilus muttered a benediction, releasing them. The stranger paused ahead, tilting his head slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. He then turned down a narrower passage lined with shrine alcoves to forgotten saints. One by one, the lumens in these alcoves winked out as he passed, darkness spreading behind him like a cloak. Avalus felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was as if the stranger absorbed faith itself. They emerged into a larger chamber, an ancient transportation hub long since abandoned. Tracks crisscrossed the floor, leading to rusting maglebs. Looming above the platforms were statues of imperial heroes, faces eroded by centuries of acidic rain dripping through cracks. At the far end, a wide gateway yawned, leading downward into even deeper levels where the air turned foul and warp-tainted. The stranger hesitated, then continued his descent. Avalus knew that sector well. It housed the catacombs where cultists performed their most depraved rituals. If this entity sought something, it lay there. Every instinct screamed to halt, to call down orbital bombardment and cleanse the entire level, yet the chance to witness this power against the warp could not be forsaken. With calm certainty, he signaled his team forward. Around him, the statues seemed to watch, their empty eyes reflecting his doubt, handing off his fear to steely determination as he stepped onto the ancient tracks. The air thickened with humidity and the stench of rotting metal as the tunnels angled downward. Pipes dripped viscous fluid onto cracked tiles, forming slick pools that reflected the dim emergency lights. Avalus's auspex flickered, interfered with by increasing levels of background radiation. He could feel the warp signature intensifying as they drew closer to the cult catacombs. The stranger ahead moved without hesitation, weaving through the maze as if drawn by an internal compass. Avalus marveled at his sense of direction. They passed a collapsed tunnel where bones protruded from mounds of silt, a reminder of the thousands entombed in the hive's underworld. Their path eventually opened into a cavernous space. The ceiling arched high above, disappearing into darkness. Once this had been an industrial ventilation chamber. Now it served a darker purpose. Candles fashioned from human fat flickered on crude altars. Chains dangled from the rafters. In the center, cultists had carved a symbol into the stone floor, a labyrinthine pattern around which they knelt, chanting discordant syllables. Their bodies were adorned with ritual scars. Some lacked eyes replaced by brass plates. At the far end stood a hulking figure, muscle and iron fused with unnatural grace. He bore the mark of a chaos champion, his skin an unhealthy crimson, his armor studded with spikes and fetishes. His eyes glowed with infernal light. He raised a chain axe, dripping with gore as he addressed his flock. The stranger strode into the chamber. Chanting faltered as cultists sensed a predator in their midst. The champion turned, chain axe revving, ready to take this intruder's skull for his deity. For a moment the room held its breath. Avalus positioned himself behind a pile of crates, focusing his senses. The champion charged, boots cracking the stone. The stranger stood motionless. Only at the last instant did he move. He raised one hand and the champion halted mid-stride, his body convulsing. Invisible tendrils lifted him into the air, his chain axe falling from limp fingers. The stranger's other hand traced a leisurely arc, and the champion's limbs tore free, separating with surgical precision. There was no spray of blood. It simply evaporated, siphoned away. The cultist screamed in horror and rage, lunging forward. Without changing expression, the stranger unleashed a wave of force that flattened them. Those nearest to him were crushed against the floor, ribs splintering. Others were hurled back into the walls with enough force to shatter bone. Avalus felt the psychic wave wash over him, but his wards held. He watched as the stranger extended his right hand, palm downward, and dark energy coalesced at his fingertips. Lightning lanced out, not the unnatural arcs of warp witchery, but something more controlled. Each bolt sought a target with unfailing accuracy. Bodies spasmed and collapsed, smoke rising from ruined flesh. Within moments the chamber was still save for the crackle of energy and the drip of fluid. The stranger walked to the center of the carved symbol. He knelt briefly, placing his palm on the stone. A surge of golden light emanated from his hand, bathing the sigil. The lines carved by the cultists flared, then crumbled into ash as if unmade. Whatever ritual had been in progress was undone. Avalus could not help the flicker of awe that rippled through him. No psyker of the Imperium could so easily dismantle a chaos ritual and remain untainted. The stranger stood, turning his gaze to the shadows. For a heartbeat, his eyes rested on Avalus, acknowledging his presence. Avalus's hand hovered near his bolt pistol, but he did not draw. The entity spoke then, words resonating in Avalus's mind rather than his ears. There were no lips moving, no breath, just meaning. The voice was deep and cold, layered with centuries of authority.
"I seek the core," it said.
"Your gods cannot stop me." Avalus swallowed. He had been addressed by creatures of the warp before, by Xenos warlords, by planetary governors quaking in fear. This was different. There was no threat, no plea, merely a statement of inevitability. He inclined his head slightly, not in obedience but in acknowledgement. If the stranger sought the heart of the cult's corruption, their goals might align, for now. With calm certainty, he motioned his followers to hold, letting the figure pass deeper into the darkness. The tension in his muscles eased not from trust, but from the knowledge that he walked beside something that could cut through a cult as a chains would through flesh. He would learn whatever he could before judgment fell, handing his apprehension to guarded curiosity. Avalus emerged from the slaughter chamber unsettled. The stranger's voice still echoed, not as a sound but as an imprint on his thoughts. He moved through corridors lined with ossified pipes, the tang of ozone from the unleashed energy still tingling in his nostrils. As they ascended to a maintenance walkway, the tech priest beside him extended a mechadendrite to a wall cogitator, fingers bristling with data spikes. The binary litany he intoned was fractured, his usually precise speech tinged with awe. Magos Helion had served at Avalus's side for decades, yet even he seemed unmoored. Without prompting, Helion began transferring picked captures and Auspex data to a secure memory vault. "We have no reference for this technology," he said softly under his breath. "Force manipulations that are not warp-sourced. It violates known physical law." Avalus nodded, absorbing the report while scanning ahead. He considered contacting the librarian to access restricted archives, but time was pressing. The stranger continued toward the hive's core. Avalus needed context now. He reached inward to the vault of memories shared by inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus through sanctioned soul-binding. Each inquisitor carried traces of his predecessors, glimpses of horrors and wonders. Closing his eyes briefly, Avalus allowed the echoes of ancient minds to speak. Images flooded him, filtered by his will. He saw a starless void where half-remembered Jedi battled legionaries in bronze armor. He saw an empire spanning galaxies torn apart by wars waged with sabers of light and minds capable of moving mountains. One memory, older than the Horus heresy, whispered of a tyrant known as the Sith Emperor who consumed entire populations to extend his life, a being beyond even Primarchs. The memory had been deemed legend by those who recorded it, yet the symbols matched the runes on the stranger's robes. Avalus pulled away from the memory pool, breathing hard. If this figure was indeed Darth Vitiate, the Emperor of the old Sith, then he was older than any living being Avalus had encountered. He was a predator of worlds. Why would such a being cross into their universe? Purpose burned behind those yellow eyes. Perhaps he sought new realms to devour. Perhaps he fled something even more monstrous.
Avalus's mind spun with possibilities.
He whispered a prayer to the Emperor for guidance, though he knew such guidance often came through action rather than revelation. He turned to his interrogator. "Collate any references to Sith or Vitiate," he ordered quietly, using calm connectors. "Deep within the Black Library there may be clues." The interrogator nodded, fingers moving across his slate. In the distance, The humming of heavy engines signaled they were nearing a transit shaft connecting to the hive's central coolant systems. The temperature dropped perceptibly.
Avalus tasted metal on his tongue.
The sensation of being watched intensified. It was no longer the stranger's mind brushing his, but 1,000 eyes in the dark. Cultists ready to defend their ritual site, demons waiting to slip through. Avalus tightened his grip on his Rosarius. He had gleaned insight from ancient archives, but knowledge did not equate to power.
He had chosen to witness this entity's journey, and now the hive itself seemed to hold its breath.
The Inquisitor forced his breathing slow, offering up his fear and drawing down composure, as if from a well. The path ahead held madness, but he would confront it with eyes open, ending the section on that soft note of resolve, passing through dread like a hand through water. The transit shaft opened into a cavernous space dominated by towering coolant pipes. Superheated air hissed from cracked conduits, filling the chamber with steam. Catwalks crisscrossed the void like spider silk, swaying underfoot. Avalus's retinue remained close, stepping carefully on the slick metal grates. Somewhere below, promethium pumps thudded rhythmically, a mechanical heartbeat of the hive. Between those beats, something else stirred. Shadows moved with intent.
Avalus's auspex pinged hostile signatures, scores of cultists arrayed along the catwalks ahead, their bodies swaying in a trance-like dance.
They wore rebreathers but no protective clothing. Their bare skin was raw and blistered from exposure to coolant vapor, yet they chanted phrases that grated like metal on stone. A leader stepped forward, taller, clad in a patchwork of hazard suits and chains. His mouth was stitched shut, forcing him to intone through his nose. In his hands, he clutched a bundle of writhing cables that connected directly into the pipework, siphoning power. The stranger paused, regarding the assembly. He raised no weapon, as if measuring the depth of opposition. The cult leader gestured, and a wave of fanatics surged.
Avalus felt the ambient temperature drop as they moved, a chill that spread along his spine.
They carried not just weapons, but devices that pulsed with warp energy, ready to overload coolant systems. If they ruptured enough pipes, the resulting explosion could sterilize half the hive. Avalus signaled his crusaders to prepare, but he held them back. Curiosity overcame protocol. The stranger extended both hands this time. The air thrummed, the metal walkway vibrating underfoot.
Avalus's teeth chattered.
The cultists froze mid-charge. Their eyes rolled back. One by one, their bodies began to desiccate, flesh shriveling as if all moisture were sucked out. In mere seconds, they collapsed into husks, crumbling under the weight of their own ritual paraphernalia. The chill deepened as life energy was stripped from dozens simultaneously. The leader tried to resist, cables sparking, his body convulsing as he channeled warp power. The stranger's gaze never wavered. The leader's skin cracked, his bones visible beneath translucent flesh, before he too fell, the cables snapping free. As the last cultist withered, Avalus heard a sigh echo through the pipes, a release of pressure, or perhaps the death exhale of those consumed. The steam cleared briefly, revealing the stranger standing amidst piles of dust. Avalus had seen the life-draining techniques of certain Xenos, but this felt different. There was no joy in the stranger's actions, no revelry. He harvested souls as one might reap a field, methodically, inevitably. He turned and continued across the catwalk. In his wake, the coolant pipes remained intact, the danger neutralized. Avalus tasted bile. To fight such a being would require more than skill and faith. It would require a fundamental understanding of this force. His mind returned to the memory of Jedi and Sith, and of wars fought with powers beyond the warp. The crusade he had witnessed in his visions had been as mythic as anything recorded in the Book of Maccabeus.
Could this single entity embody that myth?
The thought was both terrifying and fascinating. Avalus looked to his tech priest, who was still recording. This evidence would be priceless. Yet he also sensed the rising agitation of his crusaders. They were warriors. They wanted to act. He placed a hand on the pauldron of the nearest crusader, conveying steadiness without words. "Not yet," his gesture said. "Let knowledge be our armor for now." They pressed on, the steam swirling around them like ghostly fingers, the chamber quiet save for their footfalls and the distant hum of engines.
Avalus carried with him the weight of what he had just seen,
handing it off to strategic planning as he contemplated how to use this being's destructive nature against the cult's heart. Emerging from the coolant chambers, Avalus and his group found brief refuge in a maintenance hub carved into the hive's mid-belly. The hall's walls were lined with cogitator banks and servitor docking stations, most offline. Faint lumen strips cast an oily sheen. Here he paused to gather his retinue and formulate the next step. He activated a secure Vox channel, projecting a hololithic map onto the air. Runens danced, marking the stranger's path, the cult's known strongholds, and the location of loyal forces. His interrogator spoke first, his voice low. "We could coordinate with the local PDF and crush the cult while this entity draws their attention," he suggested. Magos Helion shook his head, mechadendrites whirring. "The entity is cutting a path we have never been able to carve ourselves. Interference may provoke it prematurely."
Avalus nodded in agreement.
He had rarely seen cult networks this entrenched. Every shrine destroyed by the stranger weakened the nexus feeding the central ritual. If left unchecked, the ritual would culminate in a warp tear that could swallow the hive. If allowed to progress, the stranger might halt it. His mind weighed possibilities. The Emperor teaches that all weapons are tools if wielded correctly. Could a Sith Emperor be a tool?
Avalus shuddered at the audacity of even thinking such.
Nevertheless, he had to decide. He opened a Vox link to his superiors. A holographic visage flickered into existence, Lord Inquisitor Edera masked, her features sharp despite the distortion.
"Avalus, report," she said without preamble.
He summarized events succinctly, emphasizing the unknown power's actions and the cult's impending ritual. He omitted the name Vitiate, unwilling to spread panic without proof. Mast's eyes narrowed. A being of such capability is a threat to the Imperium. Yet it is dismantling a chaos incursion, she mused. You will observe and assist where our interests align. If it threatens Imperial citizens, you will terminate with extreme prejudice. Adeptus Astartes support is en route, Avilis acknowledged. Mast's image vanished. The decision, as always, had been his to frame. He turned to his crusaders. "Prepare for contact with Death Watch elements." "We will coordinate our strike," he said with calm certainty. A metallic boom reverberated through the hall as something massive moved nearby. A servo skull buzzed in, projecting the live feed of a drop pod piercing the hive wall. Armored forms emerged, black ceramite, silver pauldrons. Death Watch had arrived. The lead marine bore the heraldry of a captain, his eyes glowing within his helm's visor. His bolter was lowered but ready. "Inquisitor Hienon through Vox, we answer your call." Avalus inclined his head. "Brother Captain, our target is unusual." He relayed his observations, watching the marine process the information. The captain's posture betrayed nothing, but Avalus sensed his skepticism. Death Watch were used to killing the unknown. Now they would be asked to stay their hand until the moment was right. The plan coalesced. The Death Watch would follow at a distance, ready to engage if the stranger turned on Imperial forces. Avalus would maintain contact and attempt to decipher the entity's ultimate goal. They would converge on the central ritual site. If the stranger destroyed it, they would allow him to leave. If he attempted to claim the hive, they would unleash everything. Simple in words, complicated in execution. Avalus felt the weight of centuries of doctrine pressing on his shoulders. He breathed deep, letting the scent of oil and incense ground him. He dismissed his retinue to their preparations. Alone for a moment, he allowed himself a whisper. "Emperor, guide my hand," he said without quoting. In the quiet humming of idle machine spirits, he felt no direct answer. Only his own resolve echoed back. He accepted it, handing his moment of prayer off to renewed purpose as he moved toward the next confrontation. Through tunnels lined with centuries of neglect and whispered prayers, Avalus advanced with the Death Watch at his side. The hulking Space Marines moved with surprising grace, their black armor whispering against the stone. Brother Captain Rise, a veteran with silvered edges to his black pauldrons, took point. His helmeted gaze scanned constantly, analyzing the data fed from his auto-senses. Behind him, Brother Artax, with a heavy bolter, covered their rear, while two others, Brother Salen of the Raven Guard and Brother Moors of the Blood Angels, flanked with deadly focus. Avalus kept pace, feeling dwarfed by these transhuman giants, but bolstered by their presence. Through the Vox, Rise communicated in clipped bursts, energy signatures ahead converging on the central shrine. Unknown entity 500 meters ahead moving with speed. Avalus acknowledged, adjusting his stride. He could sense the build-up of warp energy now, like an oppressive weight pressing on his skull. Whispers intensified. This time they did not come from the stranger, but from the ritual itself. Desperate pleas, guttural vows, the seductive promises of demonic voices. He tuned them out. The corridor opened into a cavern carved by generations of labor. It was filled with the detritus of a heretical army. Stacks of munitions, makeshift barricades, tattered banners bearing the sigils of the blood god, the Lord of Skulls. At the far end loomed the entrance to the central chamber, sealed by a massive valve door. Cultists swarmed around it, dragging chains and chanting. In their midst, the stranger stood, one hand pressed against the valve. He lifted it slightly, fingers splayed. The door began to groan, its ancient mechanism whining as it slid aside. Cultists cheered, then screamed as invisible force slammed them aside, clearing a path. Rise's grip tightened on his bolter. "On my mark, we close and provide fire support to the entity's rear," he ordered. "We engage only if hostilities are directed at Imperial forces. Moors, with me." The Blood Angel nodded, lightning claws humming. Avalus raised his bolt pistol, ready. The valve ground open fully, revealing a cavern bathed in red light. Heat rushed out, carrying the coppery tang of blood. Within, Avalus glimpsed the ritual, a massive circle carved into the floor, vats of boiling blood, towering statues of bone and brass. At its center, a man-shaped figure of muscle and armor twice the size of an Astartes raised a chain axe alight with baleful energy. He was flanked by a hooded sorcerer whose staff crackled with warp lightning. Beyond them, the warp itself tore, a swirling maelstrom of crimson and black, threatening to vomit demons into reality. The stranger stepped forward into this hell with the same measured gait he had maintained throughout his journey. The Death Watch moved to the threshold, weapons ready. Avalus took up position behind them. For a moment, he saw the scene as if, painted, black-armored angels of death facing an ancient tyrant from another galaxy, all framed by the monstrous architecture of the Hive. Despite himself, a thrill ran through him. This was why he had joined the Inquisition, to stand where no one else dared and make choices no one else could. He watched as the stranger confronted the Chaos Champion, saw the chain axe swing, saw it arrested mid-air by an unseen force. Rice's bolter followed, barrel steady. The moment stretched. Avalus held his breath. The air was thick with potential energy, like the charged calm before a thunderstorm. Each side waited for the other to break. Then, with calm certainty, the Inquisitor gave the signal. Hold. Let the stranger act. He transferred command of the moment into patience, a subtle yet powerful handoff, trusting that this choice would either save or doom the hive. The ensuing battle unfolded like a vision from the ecclesiarchy's most fevered sermons.
Avelus's eyes darted between combatants, absorbing every detail. The Chaos Champion lunged again, his chain axe singing through the air. The stranger moved with fluid precision, sidestepping the blow by the width of a hair. He thrust his hand out.
Invisible power gripped the champion by the throat, lifting him high. Muscles bulged and armor creaked as the champion fought the force, his grotesque strength straining in vain. In a single motion, the stranger wrenched his arm aside. The champion's spine snapped with a wet crack audible over the roar of boiling blood. The massive body crumpled to the floor. The hooded sorcerer shrieked, weaving warp energy into a volley of crimson lightning. The bolt struck the stranger, wrapping him in a lattice of destructive power. For a heartbeat, Avalus thought he might see the being flinch. Instead, the lightning snaked harmlessly around him, dissipating into sparks. He raised his own hand, and arcs of blinding violet erupted from his fingertips. They lanced through the sorcerer's wards as if they were parchment. The sorcerer convulsed, the hood falling back to reveal a face eaten away by corruption. His eyes burst, his skin charred, and he crumpled. The ritual surged regardless, the tear widening. Demonic appendages began to push through, claws and tentacles groping for purchase in real space. The stranger seemed to sense the escalation. He deactivated his lightning and drew something from beneath his cloak, a hilt of polished bone. With a flick of his wrist, a blade of pure red light snapped into existence. Its hum resonated through the chamber, a sound unlike any chainsword or power blade. Avalus felt the hair on his neck rise. The Death Watch leaned forward involuntarily. The stranger swung the blade in a wide arc, and the air itself seemed to part. The beam cut through demonic flesh emerging from the rift, severing limbs that shrieked and turned to smoke. He moved with a dancer's grace, each strike precise, each step measured. Behind him, the Death Watch fired disciplined bursts into cultist reinforcements spilling from side tunnels. Bolter shells detonated, tearing bodies apart. Brother Mors leapt into the melee, lightning claws flashing. Brother Salen faded into shadow, reappearing behind cultists to deliver silent death. Avalus fired his bolt pistol at a cultist, lunging for Rise's flank, the explosive round punching through the heretic's chest. The chamber became a symphony
of violence, gunfire, roaring engines of chain axes dropped by dying cultists, the crackling hum of the stranger's blade.
Through it all, the rift pulsed larger, the voices from beyond growing louder. Avalus sensed a mind pressing against the veil, something ancient and malevolent trying to enter. The stranger glanced at the tear, then at his own hilt. He clipped the blade back to his belt. Reaching under his cloak once more, he produced a small, spherical device. He tossed it into the rift. A moment later, a pulse of invisible force erupted from within the tear. The screaming increased, then cut off abruptly. The tear shuddered and began to collapse, folding in on itself like a wound, sealing. The stranger extended his hands, channeling invisible power to compress the edges together. Veins stood out on his neck, and for the first time, Avalus saw a flicker of strain. The rift fought, but the stranger's will was absolute. It closed with a sound like reality snapping. All at once, the oppressive pressure lifted. A few demonic claws thrashing on the floor dissolved into ichor. The chamber's temperature dropped. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the living. The stranger lowered his arms slowly. His chest rose and fell. Avalus noted that even this godlike being tired. The Death Watch drew closer, weapons still aimed. Rise spoke through Vox, his voice calm. "Identify yourself," he demanded. The stranger turned, yellow eyes regarding the captain. He spoke aloud this time, his voice rich and resonant. "Names are meaningless across eternity," he intoned. "I am the end of empires. I am hunger." Then he looked past Rise to Avilus. "Your emperor sends his servants to dance at the edge of oblivion," he said, as if amused. Avilus felt the weight of that gaze. He sensed neither mockery nor malice, simply observation. He chose his words carefully. "We defend humanity by any means," he replied within his own mind, letting the thought drift outward. The stranger inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the sentiment. Then, without another word, he turned away, walking toward the opposite end of the chamber, where another passage led deeper still. Avilus exchanged a glance with Rise. The captain tilted his head fractionally. For now they would let him go. Avilus's heart hammered. He had witnessed an apocalypse undone by a single being's will. He had also glimpsed the abyss within that being. With calm certainty, he holstered his pistol, handing the scene's intensity to a quieter anxiety, knowing the most crucial moment had yet to come. The path following the ritual chamber narrowed, carved through basalt and lined with twisted pillars. Faint lumens illuminated murals depicting the hive's earliest days. They had been defaced with crude scrawlings, yet some still showed the emperor blessing colonists centuries ago. Avilus walked in silence alongside the Death Watch, each lost in his own thought. The stranger moved ahead, a dark shape among shadows. The Inquisitor became aware of a presence in his mind, not an attack, but an invitation. Images swam before his inner eye, unbidden. He saw twin suns casting golden light over a silver city, towers of glass and stone reaching for the heavens. He saw a council chamber where robed figures wielded the Force with luminous blades and stoic determination. In the center, a boy looked up, eyes filled with fear and ambition. He saw that boy kneel before a robed master in a temple flooded with darkness, vows spoken in hushed tones. Centuries passed in moments. Fleets burnt, planets died. The boy, now a man, consumed the life of an entire world, his eyes blazing with hunger. He wore a crown of jagged metal and sat upon a throne carved from obsidian, surrounded by corpses.
Avilus sensed he was seeing through the stranger's perspective.
The being shared his memories not out of kindness but as a statement. "This is what I am." Empires crumbled under his hand. He endured, always seeking more. He drained the Force from anything he could touch, prolonging his existence through millennia. He became Darth Vitiate, Emperor of the Sith, annihilator of worlds. The images shifted. He saw the moment he tore free from his own reality, a ritual gone awry perhaps, or a gateway he forced open with sheer will. He fell through voids, glimpsing other universes like stars through a veil. He touched the warp and recoiled, then reached again, curious. The warp whispered to him of gods of blood and decay, of pleasure and change. He laughed at them, for they were children compared to the emptiness he commanded. He arrived in this universe to feast, to grow, to test himself against new boundaries. Avilus staggered slightly as the vision released him. He was back in the tunnel, the stone underfoot cool and real. Sweat dampened his brow. He glanced at his companions. None seemed affected. The stranger had chosen to show only him. He met the entity's gaze as they continued. For the first time, he sensed a measure of respect. Vitiate respected individuals who sought understanding. Or perhaps he saw potential to manipulate. The Inquisitor could not be certain. He processed the vision quickly. If true, Vitiate's hunger knew no bounds. He would devour worlds if left unchecked. Yet he had chosen to close the warp rift. Why? The voice drifted back to Avilus's mind.
Chaos threatens all order, Vitiate said without moving his lips. I will not let parasites consume what I seek.
Our interests align until my designs are complete. Avalus swallowed his instinctual rejection. He had allowed a monster to act because it served the Imperium's need. Could he now stop that monster? He weighed duty against possibility. In his role, he had ordered extermination of entire populations for lesser threats. But a being that could extinguish a star might not be contained by orbital bombardment. He would need to lure Vitiate into a situation where his hunger could be turned against him. A spark of an idea formed. There were things in the warp even Vitiate could not consume. Perhaps he could be led into conflict with them. Perhaps. For now, Avalus acknowledged the knowledge given, offering nothing in return. His mind burned with fresh images, but he tucked them into secure mental vaults. The path ahead brightened as faint daylight filtered down shafts. They were approaching the hive's core, a place where decisions would cement fate. He took a deep breath, handing off his newfound understanding to cautious strategy. Mordax Prime's heart was a labyrinth of reactors and vaults, a place where few outside the Mechanicus ever tread. Here, ancient plasma coils hummed, powering the spire above and the countless hab blocks below. The vaulted chamber they entered now was lined with frescoes depicting saints binding demons, the pigments dulled by centuries. Tall brass columns supported a ceiling lost in shadow, and between these columns ran the conduits that channeled power throughout the hive. The air was heavy with ozone and incense, the smell of sanctified machine oil. It was here that cult leaders had chosen to channel their ritual, drawing on the reactor's raw energy to tear open the warp. It was also here that Vitiate appeared to be heading. Avalus paused just inside the threshold, letting the Death Watch spread out along the flanks. Brother Artax took up position near a conduit, heavy bolter ready. Brother Salen vanished into darkness, his stealth generator rendering him a ghost. Rice stood beside the Inquisitor, watching Vitiate with unreadable expression. The stranger stopped in the center of the chamber. He closed his eyes. For a few moments he simply stood, breathing slowly, drawing in the energy around him.
Avalus felt the hairs on his arms stand up.
Vitiate was tapping into the reactor's electromagnetic field. He extended his hands and the air hummed louder. Luminous threads of energy drifted toward him, drawn as if by gravity. He opened his eyes. They glowed with an inner light. The frescoes shimmered. Tiny fractures snaked across the columns. Vitiate's power pressed against the chamber, testing its resilience. Avalus's instinct screamed to stop him, but he held firm. He needed to know what the entity intended. If he was about to consume the hive's power supply, a preemptive strike was necessary. The Death Watch sensed his tension. Rise shifted his grip, ready to unleash. The sound of boots echoed from a side passage. A squad of cultists charged, spurred on by desperation. They were different from those encountered earlier. Larger, their muscles swollen by dark blessings. They wore harnesses connected to small generators pumping fluids into their veins. Their leader carried a staff crowned by a skull that dripped black ichor. They barreled toward Vitiate, screeching. He did not turn. Without moving, he sent out a pulse. The lead cultist exploded, his body spraying into a fine mist. The rest stumbled, slowed. Brother Artax took the opening, his heavy bolter roaring. Shells tore through mutated flesh and armor, sending bodies tumbling. Rise and Moors swept forward to finish stragglers. In less than a minute, the threat was neutralized. Vitiate resumed his communion with the reactor. He spoke into Avalus's mind again. The power here is tempting, he said. It tastes different from the Force, a raw, unrefined essence.
I could drink it dry.
His tone held a hint of delight. Avalus replied mentally with calm caution. If you do, this hive dies, and millions with it. Your enemies will rejoice. Vitiate's lips curved slightly. Fear not, Inquisitor. I require this world intact, for now. There are deeper veins to tap elsewhere, he added. Avalus exhaled slowly. It was a small mercy. Vitiate raised his arms and drew in a measure of energy, not enough to cripple the reactors, but enough to recharge whatever reserves he had expended. Threads of power swirled around him, coiling into his palms. When he lowered his arms, the air crackled and then calmed. He turned toward a stairway descending into darkness. The path led to the ancient catacombs and the unsealed relic vaults.
Avalus realized where he was going.
Deep within the core lay relics of the dark age of technology, sealed away by the Mechanicus. Among them were devices that could warp reality without touching the warp, artifacts the Inquisition guarded even from itself. Vitiate likely sensed their presence. The Inquisitor's options narrowed. He could not allow access to those vaults. Even if Vitiate closed rifts and slew cultists, he could not be permitted to claim archaeotech of such power. Avalus turned to Rise, whispering through Vox. "We stop him at the vault door." Rise nodded curtly, signaling his marines. The time for observation was closing. The Inquisitor felt his throat dry as he prepared to confront a being who had consumed planets. He steadied himself, letting purpose settle like armor upon his mind. He stepped forward, handing off his hesitation to the iron determination necessary to oppose a dark god. The stairway descended into a circular antechamber carved from bedrock, walls lined with hexagrammic wards. In the center sat a vault door covered in adamantium plates and studded with purity seals. The seals fluttered in the stale air, their inked prayers shimmering. Each contained a fragment of the Emperor's truth. No one outside the Mechanicus was permitted beyond this point. Vitiate approached the door with the curiosity of a scholar. He ran his hand over the wards. Blue sparks danced, repelled by his touch. He smiled slightly, appreciating the craftsmanship. Avalus positioned himself between the stranger and the vault, flanked by Rise and Moors. The air was thick with tension.
Avalus spoke aloud this time, his voice low.
"This vault contains technology forbidden to all save the Holy Orders.
You will not enter."
His tone carried the weight of his authority. Vitiate regarded him calmly. "You cannot prevent me, Inquisitor," he replied mentally. His gaze flicked to the Space Marines. "You summon warriors to stand against me. Admirable yet futile." Rise took a step forward, power sword held in both hands. "The Emperor's voice forbids your passage," he said through Vox. "Stand down or be purged." The Death Watch fanned out, bolters aimed. Magos Helian, who had followed at a distance, whispered canticles to reinforce the wards. Moors flexed his lightning claws, the blue arcs playing over his blood-red gauntlets. Vitiate tilted his head, yellow eyes narrowing. He considered the display. For the first time, Avalus sensed curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of annoyance. The entity raised his hands, palms outward. The air thickened. A pressure built in Avilus's ears. He braced, chanting litanies under his breath. Magos Helian's mechadendrites sparked as he channeled his own energy into the wards. Brother Artax's finger tightened on his heavy bolter's trigger. Salen reappeared from the shadows, blade drawn. Vitiate's power manifested as a telekinetic wave, invisible yet palpable. It struck the warded door and dissipated. The hexagrammic symbols flared, absorbing the force. A second wave followed, stronger, causing dust to fall from the ceiling. The ward lines flickered, some dimming under the assault. Vitiate frowned ever so slightly. He realized brute force would not suffice. He extended a finger toward one of the seals. It blackened and curled away, consumed by his touch.
Avalus saw his chance.
He raised his bolt pistol and fired. The round exploded against an invisible barrier, inches from Vitiate's face, scattering shrapnel harmlessly. Rise moved simultaneously, lunging with his power sword. The blade met a translucent field, energy crackling along its length. The barrier held for a second, then shattered. Rise drove the blade toward Vitiate's chest. The Sith Emperor flowed aside with fluid grace, the weapon whistling past. He countered with a palm strike that drove into Rise's breastplate, sending the Marine sliding across the floor.
Moors charged, claws slashing, each strike a blur.
Vitiate parried with forearm and open hand, his movements impossibly precise. He moved between the Marines like water between stones, redirecting their momentum, turning their power against them. Salen attempted a flanking strike, emerging from the shadow at Vitiate's back. Without looking, the Sith Emperor thrust his elbow back, catching the Raven Guard in the throat. Salen staggered, auto-reactive plating sparking. Vitiate twisted, flipping Salen over his shoulder and into Mors. Artax fired his heavy bolter point blank. Mass reactive shells detonated against another unseen barrier, forcing Vitiate to plant his feet. The creature's brow furrowed. He felt each impact. Blue lightning erupted from his fingers, arcing into the heavy bolter. The machine spirit screamed as circuits fried, the gun exploding in Artax's hands. The blast knocked Artax against the wall, smoke rising from his armor.
Avalus thrust his Rosarius forward, the field shimmering.
He unleashed a psychic blast, focusing all his will. The bolt struck Vitiate's barrier, crackling. For a heartbeat, the barrier wavered. Vitiate turned his gaze on Avalus, and the Inquisitor felt a cold weight settle on his chest. The Sith Emperor gestured sharply.
Avalus was lifted off his feet, slammed into the wall. Pain lanced through his body.
He gritted his teeth, maintaining his focus. He would not scream. Rise recovered and surged forward again, his blade flashing. This time it sliced across Vitiate's forearm, drawing black ichor. The Emperor hissed, eyes narrowing.
Rage flickered across his face.
He extended his hand toward Rise and unleashed a torrent of violet lightning. The Astartes screamed, armor locking as systems shorted. Yet Rise remained standing, his enhanced physiology enduring. Vitiate's eyes widened briefly at the Space Marine's resilience. He redirected the lightning toward the ceiling instead. It struck a support, sending debris cascading.
Avalus saw his window.
He channeled his will into the wards, reinforcing them. Magos Helion did likewise. Together they pushed energy into the hexagrammic lines. They flared bright, blinding. Vitiate turned, feeling the surge. For the first time, something like respect crossed his features. He lowered his hands.
Enough, he said into their minds. I will not take what you defend so fervently, not now.
He stepped back, allowing the barrier between them to shimmer into existence again. Avalus collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. Rice staggered but remained on guard. Vitiate inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the stand. Then he turned and walked away, ascending the stair he had descended. His footfalls were measured, even in retreat.
Avalus watched him go, body screaming with pain.
He had faced a legend and survived. He felt no triumph, only relief and a dawning dread. The Emperor would demand a heavy price for allowing the Sith to leave. He caught Rise's eye. The Space Marine nodded, recognizing the same burden. Together they stood among ruined purity seals and scorched floor. The vault remained sealed, for now. Avalus handed off his fear to the knowledge that a victory, however small, had been won. Silence settled over the antechamber, broken only by the crackle of damaged wiring and the hiss of cooling metal. Avalus pushed himself to his feet, every joint protesting. He took stock of his team. Brother Artax clambered upright, one arm hanging limp, the heavy bolter a twisted ruin. Brother Salen's helm had been cracked, but he nodded to show he was conscious. Brother Mors rotated his shoulders, lightning claws powering down. Captain Rise stood tall, though scorch marks marred his ceramite. Magos Helion attended to the vault, replacing burned seals with fresh ones from his satchel. The tech priest's normally impassive face betrayed rare emotion, something between wonder and apprehension. "We held," he whispered under his breath.
Avalus allowed himself a moment to feel pride in his comrades.
Against a being older than their Imperium, they had not broken. They had forced a god to retreat. It was a fleeting triumph, but in the grim-dark reality of their lives, such moments were to be savored. He activated his Vox, connecting to his flagship, orbiting above. "This is Inquisitor Cadus. Threat neutralized for now."
Vault secure.
Begin standard containment protocols. There was a pause, then a reply.
Understood, Inquisitor.
Exterminatus order rescinded. The word carried weight. Avalus exhaled, relief washing through him.
Millions would live.
He turned to Rise. Your intervention was decisive, brother captain. The Emperor's finest indeed. Rise inclined his head modestly. We did our duty. The entity remains at large, and its intentions unknown. We will track and, if necessary, engage again. Avilus nodded. He knew this was not the last they would see of Vitiate. The Sith had tasted this universe's energies. He would return when the lure became irresistible. The Inquisitor checked his auspex. Vitiate's signal moved steadily upward through the hive, away from the vault. It did not deviate toward other critical systems.
It seemed he meant what he said, for now.
Avalus considered the next steps. He needed to send astropathic messages to the Ordo's archives to update his peers. He needed to interview survivors, to purge any cult remnants emboldened by the chaos. He needed to contemplate the ethics of his choices. He had allowed a monster to roam because it served his ends. Was that any different from the grey decisions he made daily? He thought of the images Vitiate had shown him, the galaxy-spanning cities, the devouring of worlds. His mind replayed the moment the Sith Emperor had considered drinking the hive's reactor dry. He had not because Avilus had reasoned with him, appealing to his pride and strategic sense. Could he do so again on a larger scale? The chamber's lumens flickered. Avilus looked at the frescoes. Saints-bound demons, their halos cracked and faded. He wondered how many times humanity had stood at such crossroads. He wondered what it would cost to survive the next. He turned away from the vault, pain flaring anew. He would face consequences later. For now there was work. He gestured to the Death Watch to fall in. They exited the antechamber, leaving Magos Helian to complete rites. As Avalus ascended the stair, he felt the weight of a gaze upon him. He turned, but saw only shadows. Still, he sensed Vitiate was watching somewhere, measuring him. He set his jaw and continued upward, handing off his lingering dread to a renewed vigilance. Beyond the antechamber, the hive hummed with life and death in equal measure. He stepped back into that world with the knowledge that he had defied a tyrant and lived, even as he felt the universe shifting around that act. Leaving the vault's depths, Avalus emerged into the hive's mid-levels. The air here vibrated with a different energy, not warp taint, but raw human emotion.
Panic, confusion, anger, hope.
Crowds surged through market avenues and assembly halls. Workers carried makeshift weapons, eyes wild with fear. Families huddled near shrines, whispering prayers. Overhead, banners bearing the Aquila fluttered in the recycled breeze, some defaced by cult marks now hastily scrubbed away. Voxcasters blared conflicting orders: remain calm, report to assigned stations, prepare for evacuation, trust in the Emperor. News of the ritual's end had not yet reached most citizens.
Rumors flourished. An angel of death had descended.
The Emperor himself had walked among them. The hive was cursed. Avalus and the Death Watch moved through the throng like spectres, the crowd parting before them. Some knelt as the black-armored giants passed. Others fled, fearing summary judgment.
A child tugged at Avilus's cloak.
He looked down to see wide eyes and grime-smeared cheeks.
"So did the Emperor save us?"
the child asked, without using quotes, his voice a soft tremor. Avalus considered his answer. He crouched down, meeting the child's gaze. "The Emperor watches over us all," he replied, his tone gentle. "But we must also be brave and true." He placed a gloved hand on the child's head, offering a silent blessing. The child smiled weakly and disappeared into the crowd. Such small human moments grounded Avalus. He needed them as much as prayers. At a nearby intersection, Arbites had formed a checkpoint. They saluted as Avalus approached. Their commander, a grizzled woman with a scar across her cheek, reported, "Inquisitor, cult activity has diminished. Some pockets resist, but most are scattering. Civilians are panicked but responsive to authority. We lost half our precinct in the initial incursion." Her eyes flicked to the Death Watch. Who was he?
Avalus knew she meant the stranger.
He chose his words carefully. An outsider who opposed the cult for reasons of his own, he said. He is gone. Focus on rebuilding and purging remaining heretics. The commander nodded, not questioning further. In the distance, smoke still rose from hab blocks. Fires burned unchecked in places where water supplies had been sabotaged.
Avalus watched a chimney collapse, sending sparks into the night.
He realized the hive would bear scars from this day for generations. He resumed walking, making mental notes, requisition materials for reconstruction, assign tech priests to inspect reactors, schedule public litanies to reinforce faith. He would have to hold tribunals, interrogate captured cultists, hunt down those who fled. He would have to protect citizens from reprisals by overzealous enforcers. For a moment, he longed for the simplicity of the battle in the vault.
An enemy defined and contained.
But that was not the Inquisition's way. Their duty did not end when the diamond was banished. It began. He reached the spire's lift network. A servo skull hovered, offering him a sealed Vox message. He took it, pressing it to his ear. Lord Inquisitor Mast's voice emerged. Avalus, reports indicate your mission is complete. You are to remain on Mordax Prime for decontamination protocols and to oversee full purge of cult activity. You will submit a detailed account of the entity, including psychological assessments. The Ordo Malleus will deliberate on whether to classify this being as a nemesis-level threat. Avalus acknowledged. He pocketed the message. The lift arrived, its doors hissing open. He stepped inside with Rise. As the compartment ascended, he leaned against the wall, exhaustion seeping into his bones. Rise removed his helmet, revealing stern features and cybernetic implants. You fought well, Inquisitor, the Space Marine said. Avalus managed a faint smile.
And you, Captain?
Today we witnessed something beyond both our experiences.
We may need to face it again.
Rice's gaze was distant. The Emperor's light endures, he said simply. The lift stopped at the strategium level. Avalus stepped out, handing off his fatigue to the routine that awaited him. He would draft his report, deliver his orders, plan for contingencies. The battle in the vault was over, but the war against the unknown continued. The hive buzzed with life. Its underbelly had been cleansed, at least for now. He took comfort in that, even as he sensed the shadow of the Sith Emperor somewhere in the universe, waiting back in his strategium. Surrounded by maps and data streams, Avalus sat before an astropathic conduit. The chamber was warded, walls covered in silvered skulls and incense burners. Hooded astropaths sat in alcoves, eyes bandaged, hands hovering over rune-encrusted slates. Their mouths moved in silent prayer, preparing to send thoughts across unimaginable distances. Avilus composed his message carefully. Each Inquisitor's report was both evidence and weapon. He summarized the cult's plans, the stranger's interventions, the closing of the rift, the confrontation at the vault. He described Vitiate's powers in clinical detail, telekinesis without warp signature, energy manipulation that consumed life, a blade of light capable of cutting demons. He included his personal impressions, the entity's intelligence, its ancient hunger, its disdain for chaos, its respect for strength. He omitted nothing about the vision he had been shown. His peers needed to understand the scope of this threat. As he spoke, the astropath's hands twitched, translating his words into psychic pulses. Each thought would be transmitted through the warp to Terra, to be recorded in the Ordo Malleus archives.
Avalus paused, considering whether to mention the moment he pleaded with Vitiate not to drain the reactor.
He chose to include it. Transparency was the Inquisition's safeguard against internal betrayal. He dictated, the entity responded to reason and self-interest, implying it is not wholly consumed by madness. It may be manipulated under specific circumstances. He regretted the admission even as he made it. The message concluded with recommendations, increased monitoring of warp anomalies for similar incursions, classification of Vitiate as a tier prohibitus entity, caution against immediate engagement without overwhelming force. The astropath whispered the final canticle, and the message vanished into the psychic highway.
Avalus leaned back, closing his eyes briefly.
He imagined his words threading through the immaterium, dodging predators, carrying his experiences to colleagues he had never met. Somewhere, an inquisitor on a distant world would read and prepare. The thought offered solace. He moved to his control dais, pulling up feeds. He watched as Arbites raided a cult safehouse, capturing heretics. He monitored the Death Watch as they boarded their Thunderhawk, leaving Mordax Prime. He saw servitors lifting rubble, citizens lining up for food distribution. Life continued. A beep indicated an incoming transmission. He accepted. A robed figure flickered into holographic existence, a librarian from the Death Watch's fortress monastery. His features were gaunt, his eyes glowing with psychic power. "Inquisitor Cadus," he said quietly, "Brother Captain Rise reports your actions. The chapter expresses gratitude for your cooperation. We have reviewed our archives. There are legends of Vitiate recorded by ancient human colonies predating the age of strife. They speak of a devourer of worlds. If this being is that myth, we may face him again." Avalus inclined his head. "I appreciate your counsel. Share any information you uncover." The librarian nodded, his image flickering. "May the Emperor's shadow cloak you, Inquisitor." The transmission ended.
Avalus exhaled.
He turned his gaze out the strategium window. The sky had cleared somewhat, the perpetual smog thinned by the eruption. Stars were visible, faint pinpricks of light. Beyond them lay unimaginable gulfs, perhaps even the reality Vitiate came from.
Avalus felt a mixture of awe and dread.
The galaxy was ancient and vast. Humanity's dominion, though mighty, was a flickering candle in a storm. He pressed his palm to the cold glass, sensing the hum of the hive beneath. He whispered to himself, not for others to hear. "We will endure," he said softly, "because there is no other choice." His reflection looked back at him, haggard, eyes ringed with fatigue, yet unwavering. He turned away, handing his introspection to action as he returned to his duties. There were still cult cells to purge, fires to extinguish, hearts to steal. Outside, the world kept spinning, indifferent to the plans of gods and men. Night, such as it existed on Mordax Prime, shrouded the hive in deeper gloom. The upper hive's lights glimmered like stars inverted, while the lower levels swam in darkness punctuated by sporadic flares. Avalus walked the parapet of the spire, cloak billowing in the toxic breeze. He had taken to making such rounds after crises, grounding himself in the tangible reality of stone and metal. The air here was thinner, colder. He looked down at the city he had saved. Fires still smoldered, but the worst had been contained. Arbites patrols marched in formation, their lanterns bobbing.
Chanting drifted up from a cathedral where priests led a night vigil.
Faith, Avalus mused, was both anchor and blade. It had steadied him in the vault. It had given him the courage to stand before Vitiate. It would carry these people through the rebuilding to come. He thought of the Sith Emperor at large in the galaxy. Where would he go next? Would he seek other hives, other worlds, systems rich in life to devour?
Or would he burrow into the warp, challenging the ruinous powers in their own domain?
The thought of Vitiate clashing with a demon Primarch sent a shiver along Avelus's spine. Could such a battle weaken the warp? Or would it tear the veil further? He did not know. He only knew that he would need to be ready. A servo skull drifted close, projecting the upcoming schedule. Meetings with the planetary governor, with Mechanicus overseers, with ecclesiarchy representatives, debriefings with his own acolytes. He sighed softly. In times like these, he yearned for the simplicity of his early days as an acolyte, when he could focus on one threat at a time. He missed the guidance of his mentor, Inquisitor Lucretia, long ago martyred. He imagined what she would say, "That duty is a chain, forged link by link with each decision. You cannot put it down. You can only ensure it doesn't break." Avalus touched the rosarius at his chest. Each purity seal on it represented a vow fulfilled, a sin forgiven, a life taken for the Imperium. He wondered what vow he would need to make regarding Vitiate. A message rune blinked on his wrist console. He pressed it, and a voice emanated. "Inquisitor, this is Interrogator Fell, currently interrogating captured cultists. One of them claimed the ritual was not meant to summon demons, but to attract something called the Devourer of Worlds. They said he would feast on our blood and then our souls."
Avalus's jaw tightened.
He looked at the distant horizon where lightning flickered. He replied, "Continue interrogation, cross-reference names and deities. Report to me any further intelligence." He closed the channel. It seemed the cult had been trying to summon Vitiate himself. That knowledge unsettled him. Had the Sith Emperor been lured here deliberately, or had he used their ritual as a doorway, twisting their intentions to his own ends? Either possibility was disturbing. He gazed out until his eyes watered, the chemical-laden wind burning his lungs. In the darkness, he imagined he saw a shadow moving just at the edge of his vision. He blinked, and it was gone, a trick of fatigue. Nevertheless, he felt watched. He whispered again, to the night, and to whoever might be listening. "If you return, we will be ready," he said, with calm certainty. His words dissipated, carried away by the wind. He turned and descended from the parapet, handing his vigil off to the memory of countless guardians who had stood the same watch over millennia. He was but one link in that chain, but he would not be the one to let it fail. Sleep came to Avalus fitfully. He lay in his quarters, a sparse chamber adorned with relics and a narrow bunk.
Incense burned in a corner, its smoke curling in patterns that put his mind at ease.
Still, images flickered behind his eyelids. Yellow eyes, red blades, ancient cities. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were vivid. He stood upon a barren plain under a blood-red sky. Columns of light descended from above, each containing a scene. In one, he saw Vitiate sitting on a throne of skulls, consuming a world's life like a swirling mist. In another, he saw the Emperor of mankind, radiant and terrible, standing before humanity, arms outstretched. Between them stretched a bridge of souls, each soul a point of light connecting the two titans.
Avalus attempted to walk this bridge.
It trembled beneath him. Voices rose, familiar and strange. Lucretia's voice told him to choose carefully which powers he invoked. Lord Inquisitor Mast's voice cautioned against hubris. A child's voice, the boy from the hive, asked who would protect him if Avalus failed. Halfway across, he encountered a figure cloaked in darkness. It raised its hand, and Avalus felt himself freeze. The figure lifted its hood. It was Vitiate, but his eyes were not yellow. They were stars. Behind him loomed a monstrous shadow with horns and a crown. Vitiate spoke without moving his lips. "Why do you fear me when you worship one who is like me?" he asked.
Avalus attempted to answer, but his voice vanished.
He tried to summon the Emperor's image, but the shadow eclipsed it. He felt a pressure behind his eyes. He forced his mind to recite the litany of protection. Words formed, pushing against the oppressive dream. The shadow recoiled, and for a moment the bridge solidified. He sprinted, waking as he felt the ground crumble. He sat upright, heart hammering, sweat cooling on his skin. The incense had burnt low. The chrono indicated he had slept less than an hour. He wiped his face with trembling hands. Dreams were often visions in the warp. He considered what he had seen. Vitiate equated himself with the Emperor. Blasphemy. Yet both wielded powers beyond comprehension. Both shaped humanity's fate. The dream emphasized his fear that humanity might mistake one for the other. He shook his head, dispelling the thought. The Emperor was a being of sacrifice, of unity, of hope. Vitiate was consumption incarnate. There could be no equivalence. Avalus stood, pulling on his robes. Sleep would not return. He walked to his shrine, kneeling before a relic, a shard of armor said to have belonged to a Primarch. He bowed his head, whispering prayers not as habit, but as plea. "Emperor, grant me clarity. Grant me strength. Guard my mind." In the silence that followed, He did not hear a voice, but he felt warmth settle over him, as if a hand rested gently on his shoulder. Perhaps it was his imagination, or perhaps the Emperor did hear. He rose, a measure of calm restored. He left his quarters, choosing to work through the night. He had discovered that action dispelled fear more effectively than contemplation. The dream's images lingered, but he turned them into impetus. He would not allow Vitiate to become a false idol to his people. He would ensure the Emperor's truth shone brighter than any corrupt star. With that resolve, he stepped back into the corridors, handing his disquiet to the momentum of duty. Weeks passed. Mordax Prime slowly returned to a semblance of routine. Factories resumed their relentless production, though with stricter oversight. Arbite's squads patrolled with renewed vigilance. The ecclesiarchy organized processions and sermons, attributing the hive's salvation solely to the Emperor's grace. Few spoke openly of the stranger who had slaughtered cultists and sealed a warp rift. Those who did were silenced or recruited into the Ordo's hush-houses. Avalus spent his days and nights coordinating purges, interrogations, and reconstruction. He followed up on leads, rooting out pockets of heresy. In the process, he uncovered hints of a wider network, cells on other worlds preparing similar rituals. Astropathic messages confirmed that across the sector, cults were speaking of a devourer of worlds. Some revered him, others sought to bind him. Vitiate's presence had ripple effects. It was during one of these interrogations that Avilus learned something new. The cultist, broken and weeping, whispered that their master had promised salvation from the Four, that the devourer would consume even corn. Avilus's eyes narrowed. If true, Vitiate might become a weapon against the ruinous powers. But weapons with wills of their own were dangerous. He sent information to other inquisitors. Some responded with interest, others with skepticism. A reply came from Ordo Xenos Lord Dalmia, warning that reliance on unknown beings had doomed civilizations in the past. Another missive from an Ordo Chronos contact suggested the possibility that Vitiate's arrival was a fixed point in certain timelines. Avilus pondered. He studied forbidden tomes, seeking references. He oversaw training drills, ensuring his acolytes could face psychic assault. He held strategy sessions with Adeptus Astartes liaisons, all while waiting for the next sign of Vitiate. It came in the form of a distress signal from a mining world 3 light-years away. Reports spoke of an entire valley drained of life overnight, followed by spectral lights in the sky. Auspex recorded an energy signature identical to the one Avilus had tracked during the ritual. Vitiate had begun to feed.
Avalus requested immediate deployment.
Lord Mast granted it, though not without reservation. Do not overreach, she cautioned through Vox. Remember that your duty is to humanity. Avalus acknowledged. He prepared his ship, loading ordnance, briefing his team. Rise and a small contingent of Deathwatch requested to accompany him. Avilus agreed. As they lifted from Mordax Prime, he looked down at the hive. It gleamed under the filtered sun, scars healing. He felt a pang of attachment. He prayed he had done enough to ensure its continued survival. The warp opened before them, their Geller field shimmering. As the ship entered the Sea of Souls, Avalus stared into the swirling colors. He thought of the dream bridge, of Vitiate's eyes, of the Emperor's warmth. He whispered a prayer and then turned to his duties, handing the weight of the moment to the preparedness of action. The horizon was uncertain, but his path was clear. He would track Vitiate, study him, confront him if necessary, and harness or destroy him for the Imperium's sake. Duty required nothing less. The journey to the mining world of Nihilus IV was brief by stellar standards, yet fraught with the hazards of warp travel. Demonic presences scratched at the Geller field, ghostly faces pressed against hull, eyes begging for entry. Choirs of astropaths sang constantly, their voices intertwined with the ship's machine spirits.
Avalus stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching the swirling madness through reinforced glass.
Brother Captain Rice stood beside him, helmeted, a silent sentinel. The Inquisitor's mind replayed the events on Mordax Prime, measuring his decisions. He wondered if he had become too entangled with Vitiate's fate. He knew some of his peers would argue for immediate extermination. He also knew that without understanding, such an attempt might doom worlds. The ship emerged from the warp with a lurch. The void outside snapped into focus, black, studded with stars. Nicholas IV hung ahead, a world scarred by strip mining. Its atmosphere glowed faintly, polluted by centuries of industry. A single settlement cluster appeared on the equator, its lights flickering. Vox transmissions were sporadic, interspersed with screams and static. Avalos issued orders: deploy probes, ready landing craft, activate Auspex. Data flooded in. Life signs near the valley were almost non-existent. Energy readings spiked, then dipped, as if something fed intermittently.
Avalos felt his pulse quicken.
They descended. The Thunderhawk cut through the tainted air, engines roaring. Dust clouds billowed, obscuring the ground until the craft's landing lights pierced them. The ramp lowered.
Avalos stepped onto cracked earth.
The valley stretched before him, an open wound carved by machines. Dig sites lay abandoned, machinery stilled mid-motion. At the valley's center was a depression where nothing grew. Not even insects stirred. The air was cold despite the world's climate. Avalos's breath fogged. He walked forward, boots crunching on desiccated soil. The Death Watch fanned out, bolters raised. He knelt and touched the ground. It was brittle, devoid of moisture. He stood, scanning. A figure materialized at the valley's edge, not with flash or spectacle, but by simple presence. Darth Vitiate stood, hands clasped, robes untouched by dust. His eyes glowed faintly. He inclined his head.
Inquisitor, he said into Avalos's mind.
You followed. Avilos felt a mixture of dread and resolve. He approached cautiously. You are killing my Emperor's subjects, he replied without speech. Vitiate's mouth twitched.
I am feeding, as is my nature. Chaos nips at my heels. I will not starve to spare your people. Avalos weighed his words.
He sensed the life that had been drained, the souls pulled into Vitiate's boundless hunger.
Anger flared.
Yet he also sensed something else, a roiling presence behind the Sith Emperor, like a wave of warp energy building.
Chaos might already be hunting him. Avalos spoke aloud using a calm cadence.
There are other forms of sustenance. There are worlds overrun by demons, ripe with corrupt energy.
Feed on them, spare humanity.
Vitiate's eyes narrowed, considering. You had herd me like a beast, he said slowly.
Offer me prey. Avalos did not flinch.
Better I guide your hunger than allow it to rampage blindly. Vitiate smiled, a genuine expression that did not reach his eyes. You are bold, Inquisitor.
Perhaps that is why I showed you my past.
He lifted his hand and with a gesture summoned a sphere of light. Images flickered within, a demon world seething with blood and madness. A thought took shape in Avalos's mind. He could direct Vitiate towards such a place.
It would be monstrous, but less so than allowing him to drain Imperial worlds.
It would also pit the Sith Emperor against the ruinous powers directly.
A conflict that might weaken both. Avalos chose.
Beyond the Eye of Terror lies a planet called Axthar, he said mentally. Its soil is soaked in corrupted blood.
Feed there.
Vitiate's eyes gleamed. He considered, then inclined his head. I accept your offering for now. If your guidance proves false, I will return. He lifted his hand. The air rippled. A tear opened, not like the warp rift on Mordax Prime, but a clean incision of reality. Emerald light spilled. He stepped toward it, pausing to look back. Tell your Emperor I am not his enemy yet, he said. Then he vanished into the light, the tear sealing behind him. The valley fell silent.
Avalos stood, heart racing.
He had bargained with a monster. He hoped the path he had chosen would divert the worst. He turned to Rise. We must notify Fleet Command. Prepare for potential backlash from Chaos forces. Rise nodded, his expression hidden. The captain opened a Vox channel.
Avalus watched the empty air where Vitiate had stood.
He felt both relief and guilt. He had not defeated the Sith Emperor. He had diverted him. The cost would be measured in the blood of demons and perhaps countless others. He would bear that burden. He inhaled the cold, dead air of Nihilus IV. With calm certainty, he turned back toward the Thunderhawk, handing off the valley's silence to the roaring engines that would carry him onward. The future remained dark, but he had carved a path through it. His duty was clear. The Emperor demanded no less. The script concludes on this quiet promise of vigilance and sacrifice. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button. And the Emperor protects those who support the channel.